In the late 1500s, the remote island of Mauritius was an absolute biological vacuum. For millions of years, there were zero natural predators here. In this isolated paradise lived a massive 20-kilogram flightless bird. We know it today as the dodo. Toward the end of the 16th century, European sailors dropped anchor on these shores. They brought dogs, cats, and rats, predators that had never set foot on the island. When confronted by these foreign animals, the dodos exhibited a bizarre response. They didn't attack, and they didn't run away. They simply stared at the looming danger. Their isolated environment had completely stripped them of the evolutionary hardware required to recognize a threat. Nature is completely unforgiving of this kind of vulnerability. Within exactly a century of that first contact, every single dodo on Earth was wiped out. The Hindi language has a specific term for what these birds lacked, shatru both, or enemy perception. It is the internal instinct to recognize an existential threat. We must ask a terrifying question. What happens when this exact same biological blind spot infects the wealthiest, most heavily armed human empire on Earth? We shift to 16th century South India, to the Vijayanagara Empire. This was a state operating at the absolute peak of human achievement. It possessed a military force that terrified its neighbors and monumental architecture that projected total permanence. European merchants who traveled there wrote accounts of profound disbelief. They openly complained that global trade was being entirely swallowed by this single city, that all the world's finest gold and high-quality wine were flowing directly into Vijayanagara's treasuries. This immense wealth sat in the middle of a highly hostile environment. Vijayanagara was surrounded by 5 rival sultanates: Bidar, Berar, Golconda, Ahmednagar, and Bijapur. Those neighboring states constantly tested the borders. Even when the sultanates formed joint alliances to consolidate their forces, Vijayanagara's army effortlessly crushed them, winning war after war. Decades of uninterrupted victory creates an incredibly dangerous psychological condition. The sheer scale of their success insulated the empire, creating a cognitive bubble identical to a remote island with no natural predators. When Aliya Rama Raya took power, the empire's instinct for survival was completely overridden by his own supreme arrogance. 2 brothers, Noor Khan and Bijli Khan Gilani, had recently been dismissed from the rival Ahmednagar army. Rama Raya was so impressed by them that he brought them to Vijayanagara and immediately appointed them as high-ranking commanders in his own military. He didn't just give them titles. Acting on their direct advice, Rama Raya placed a massive contingent of soldiers completely under the autonomous control of the Gilani brothers. The integration went far deeper than military restructuring. To make his new commanders feel entirely comfortable, the emperor ordered the construction of a mosque directly inside the royal palace complex. He took court protocol a step further. A copy of the Quran was placed prominently near the royal throne. This ensured that when the Gilanini brothers bowed to the emperor, they would not be compromising their own religious faith. Through these policy decisions, Rama Raya bypassed every external defense mechanism his empire had built. He was personally inviting the foreign sailors and the dogs directly onto his island. The breaking point arrived on January 23, 1565. The rival sultanates organized their forces for a massive combined assault on Vijayanagara. For the first few hours, the battle unfolded exactly as history dictated it should. By noon, the invincible Vijayanagara army was overwhelming the alliance, securing yet another effortless victory. Certain of his triumph, Rama Raya decided to personally inspect the battlefield. He didn't ride out on a war horse in armor. He entered the active combat zone being carried in a luxurious palanquin. And that is the exact moment the trap sprang. The Gilani brothers, surrounded by the massive contingent Rama Raya had granted them, turned their weapons on the emperor. Mid-battle, they merged their forces with the invading sultanates. The entire theater of war inverted in seconds. Rama Raya was captured before his guards could react, turning a guaranteed systemic victory into an absolute, irreversible collapse. Back in the capital, survivors rode in frantically. They screamed for the city to close its massive gates and fortify the walls, because the enemy was marching directly toward them. The citizens and the city guards literally laughed at them. They were so deeply infected by their own myth of invincibility that they assumed the warnings were a joke. A pack of jackals cannot hunt lions. But by sunset, the joke was entirely over. Rama Raya's severed head was paraded on the tip of Nizam Shah's spear. The wealthiest, dominant city on earth was systematically dismantled. Temples, treasuries, and palaces were reduced entirely to rubble. The ruins of Hampi standing today are the geopolitical equivalent of fossilized dodo bones, the physical remnants of an entity that forgot danger. The facts are brutally clear. Infinite wealth, overwhelming military strength, and a flawless track record of past success offer absolutely zero protection if the system itself loses its internal instinct to survive. The collapse of the Vijayanagara serves as a predictive model for any modern superpower or corporation that ignores its internal alarms and loses its Shatru Bodh.